Good evening. I'm Dr. Barbara Holmes, president of United Theological Seminary. What a wonderful evening we have in store for you. Let me introduce you to our board chair, Lou Zeidner.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. And welcome to the 25th anniversary of the Susan Draper White Lectures in Women's Studies. This series is an endowed lectureship established by Priscilla Braun, the United Class of 1983, in memory of her grandmother, Susan Draper White. I now call Reverend Dr. Carolyn Pressler, United's Harry C. Piper, Jr., Professor of Biblical Interpretation and an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ.
It is my very great privilege not only to welcome you here, and what a wonderful, wonderful group. I feel like old home week because there's so many former students here. It's wonderful. But it's also my very great privilege to introduce to you Gail Anderson, who is not only the moderator of this evening's panel, but was also the lead organizer of the event. Without Gail this evening, we would not be here learning about Islam, a feminist religion. There isn't enough time to lift up the many relevant areas of knowledge and skills that Gail brought to this particular event. So I'll just name two such threads. One is she knows United. Gail graduated from this seminary in 2005. I have to say she was a marvelous student. Then went on to serve as chair of the Alumnal Council, and finally as a Board of Trustee member, before being hired as a member of the United staff, directing both communications and our interfaith and intercultural initiative, a very important aspect of the life of this school. She understands who we are and how we function very, very well. And believe me, as an old organizer, I know that that's critical for getting an event like this to work. Her directorship of the Interfaith Initiative points to a second dimension of her career that you need to know about. That is, for over 10 years, she has been an interfaith activist, primarily with, though not exclusively with, Muslims and Muslim-Christian relations. Prior to coming to us, and I'm glad we had her do that, Gail served as the Director of Unity and Relationships at the Minnesota Council of Churches, where, among other impressive programming, she developed Taking Heart, which brings hundreds of Muslims and non-Muslims together around the fast-breaking meal during evenings of Ramadan. And that was my own initial introduction to the Muslim community in the Twin Cities. So I'm particularly grateful for that. She also, along with the Islamic Center of Minnesota, organized the longest running Christian-Muslim or Muslim-Christian dialogue in the nation. Here at United, she's worked to include immersion experiences for the students so they can meet and really get to know people from other faith communities. And she has convened public interfaith events as well as overseeing the production of the TPT special broadcast, Giving Thanks in Many Voices, which highlights the contributions of Minnesota's varied immigrant communities. Gail is leaving us soon, but our loss is the wider church's gain because she is leaving us to start a new venture entitled Empathy Works, where she will help organizations and individuals understand the multi-faith, multicultural environment in which we all work and worship, and also help us design programs to counter the divisiveness and hateful rhetoric that all of us have been hearing on a daily basis. Please join me in welcoming Gail Anderson and our panelists, whom she will introduce.
Thank you. Wait till you hear these three, then you'll really want to clap. So I'm really excited to be the moderator of tonight's event, and I'm really honored to share the table with these distinguished and well-respected colleagues of mine. And it's great to see the chapel this full, so thank you for coming out tonight. I'm going to say, because I'm moderating, but I'm also the organizer, there's some reserved, those can go away now. People can sit there, so come on in. If you need, I'm going to do some housekeeping. The bathrooms are right around the corner as you go back out towards the door. There's going to be a reception. You see the food is over there afterwards, so please stay and enjoy some treats. And there's a table right in the back with some literature of the activities of our panelists, so be sure to check that out also if you haven't already. So tonight we're going to hear, oh look, they came up. Tonight we're going to hear from three women who are well known and respected in the Muslim community, and by the end of this program, they will also be well known and respected by the people in this room, believe me. I'll do a more complete introduction of each of our panelists before they speak, but I'd like to briefly introduce you, Dr. Fatma Reda, Sheikha Tamara Gray, and Nausheena Hussain. Each of our panelists is going to speak for about 15 and 20 minutes, and after they're done, we will answer some of your questions. We have some note paper around. I hope there's some pens too, but maybe you've brought some. So they're going to speak in sequence, and then we'll take questions. So if you're thinking of a question for one of them, write who you would like to direct the question to, and pass them down, and people will pick them up and bring them up to us. I hope we can sort through a lot of your questions. If we stayed all night answering all your questions, I'm sure we'll be here till midnight. So we hope this will consolidate some of that and move it along. So our first speaker this evening is Dr. Fatma Reda. Dr. Reda and I have known each other for almost a decade, and we've done presentations like this together on topics like this several times. She's originally from Egypt, has been in the United States for 45 years. She's a practicing psychiatrist, often working with people who have experienced the trauma of war, among other things. And her interest in healing practices has led her to study with Navajo and Bedouins. And she's currently on the staff of the Mayo Clinic, and she drove up here tonight and didn't even get dinner to get to us. She also, aside from having an MD and being a psychiatrist, she has an advanced degree in religion from the University of Canterbury. She's also very involved in social action and has recently finished her term serving as the chair of the board of the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, which is a group of Christians, Muslims, and Jews who advocate the state legislature together. So, Dr. Reda.
Thank you very much. First, I will start by thanking United for inviting me. I'm not new to United. Actually, it was way at the beginning of my career in interfaith work that United invited me to be a part of one of the most enjoyable functions I've ever done. I mean, usually interfaith work is at least 50-50 pleasant and hostility, if you know what I mean. At least, I mean, on a good day, it's 50-50. But at that time, we had Dr. Yates, Wilson Yates, for those of you who remember him, he was the president here, and we had a project by the name of the Tent of Meeting. I don't know whether any of you remember that. It was 1985. That's not exactly ancient history, but semi for the young ones here. And we had a Jewish woman from Santa Fe, New Mexico, by the name of Michelle Zackheim, who came in and actually erected a tent with 3 walls, one for Judaism, one for Christianity, and one for Islam, and tried to depict in her painting and the artwork that she did on those walls what theologists call master stories of those 3 religious traditions. So for For the Jews, it was the Exodus from Egypt. That's the master story. For Christians, it was the Passion, Resurrection of Jesus. And guess what it is for Muslims? Does anybody know what the master? You know what a master story is? Master story is the central narrative of a religious tradition that tells us about our position in the world, what we expect, and what's expected of us. And so in the words of a very dear friend of mine by the name of Rachel Adler, it doesn't only inform us, it also forms us. We are formed by the master stories of our religious traditions. For Islam, it's almost exactly the same as it is for Judaism. It's the hijrah, the immigration from Mecca under the dark of night and actually running away from those who were against the new religion, and then establishing a just society, all right, in Medina, which was called Yathrib at that time. And that's where all religious ideology, Muslim religious ideology, begins. It doesn't just begin at revelation. It begins actually in earnest, as far as how do we live. Most of the time they spent in Mecca was about the relationship with the Creator. Who are we? What does he want from us? Yes, he is one. No, he isn't one. And so on and so forth. That was established in the 10 years they spent, Muhammad ﷺ spent in Mecca. In Medina, he established a just society. And so one of the most important parts that we Muslims are assigned to do in this life is to pursue justice, exactly like Jews do and like Christians do. But I mean, I'm just, as far as the scriptures and how much emphasis there is in this. In other words, there is no such thing in Islam as just pure spirituality. That's considered self-indulgence, all right? And there is a very famous story that we Muslim children are told when we're growing up about a guy who came to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and told him, my brother doesn't pray. He said, why does he not pray? He said, because he doesn't have time to pray. I said, what do you mean he doesn't have time to pray? What's he doing all day? He said, he's working 15 jobs or 3 jobs or whatever. Why does he have to work that much? Because he is supporting my and his family. Okay, so I understand he's supporting his family. Why is he supporting your family? He said, because I'm sitting up on the mountain praying all the time. So you can guess what Prophet Muhammad told them. All right? And Prophet Muhammad was a very kind person, but he did not allow any nonsense. I mean, he was a Semite prophet at the same time. Right is right and wrong is wrong. So you go work too, because chances are he may enter heaven before you. All right? أخوك أعبد منك. He is more spiritual than you are. He is more in adherence or what do I say for abadu mink? Abadu means more, sorry? More worshipful, more attendant to the religion than you are. So this is something that you are told and it's spoken to you about since you are way big. There is no such thing as just, oh, wow, isn't it so good to be in relationship with the Creator? No, the relationship with the Creator is here what you do in this world. I remember distinctly when I was about 8, I wanted to be a nun. So I went to my father and said, Daddy, isn't it just great to be the bride of Christ? So it was tantalizing to me. I mean, I was just fascinated by the thought, and I loved nuns, I still do to this day. And he said, first, you have to be a Catholic. All right? And so go think about it, and when you decide on it, come back and I'll tell you the next, number 2 and 3 and 4. All right. It didn't take very long to recognize that what he was telling me is each of us has a calling that does not have to be exactly the same as the other person, and all the pieces are needed. Nuns are needed, and non-nuns are needed. Catholic women who decide to have children and rather than be celibate, and the same thing for men. You can be a Muslim and be in service to others like the brides of Christ are. And so that's one of the reasons that my younger sister and I enter medicine. We both are physicians, and as a matter of fact, most of the women in my family are physicians, and the men are engineers, and that's left brain and right brain, and forget about that. So anyhow, now what I would like to mention to you today is a couple of things about what is, and we're supposed to be talking about Islamic feminism, or Islam as a feminist religion. And we really mean it. I mean, you know, Tamara will talk to you, and Nausheena we really mean it. We're not joking about it. Islam is the doctrine in Islam, and the teachings of Muhammad couldn't be best as far as serving what Islamic feminism is. It's a bit different than Western feminism. We don't burn bras, we don't do stuff like that. We work from, I mean, to each his own. I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong or right, it's just not for me. You know, I mean, if that's how she wants to, as long as you're not hurting someone else, you know, it's up to you. But the most important thing is how the teaching supports the idea of what we recognize in a modern society as feminism. What are we talking about? And again, when I was about 14, my father gave me a book by, guess who? Simone de Beauvoir. You know, a secular person who's living in sin, quote unquote, who is Jean-Paul Sartre. And my mother asked him, why are you giving her this? He said, well, you know, you'll both find out in a little bit. The message of the book was, there is no social freedom without economic freedom. Whoever controls resources controls life. All right? And so if you want to be an independent, autonomous human being, whether you're married or not married or whatever, you have to make a living. You don't wait for inheritance from your dad, and you don't wait for support from your husband. Instead of just supporting, you both contribute to supporting the family. It's a very important thing, and so much so he believed in it, so much so to the point that he refused for any of us 3 girls in the family to be even spoken to about marriage until we finished college. Every single one of us. And by the way, that is not at all unusual in what we call the third world. All right? You know, ask a Pakistani, ask an Indian, ask an Eastern European, ask whatever. My mother used to say, when did we get to be the third world? I thought we were there first. Well, so obviously what we're talking about is technological advancement. But Islam is not content with technological advancement. Islam insists on building a civilization. And in order to call a society civilized, certain things have to exist. Number one is social justice. All right? What are we you know, I'm not going to go into politics right now on who I'm voting for. I think you can guess. But clearly, this unequal distribution of wealth is for the birds. It's totally un-Islamic. Totally un-Islamic. It's very important that, and this is where women as a minority then, or as a minority group, although they've never been a minority as far as numbers in any society, women are always about 51 to 52% of the population. But they are a status minority, let's say. This is where it's very, very important to pay attention to, and that's why you will find a lot of women who are involved in social service and in social justice kind of endeavors. Where does that come from? Okay, we talked about the teachings. It starts with a very important sentence or phrase in the Qur'an. إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. What does that mean? It means God is speaking to humanity and saying, I have created you of a male and a female, and I have made you into tribes and nations, different from one another, so that you can get to know one another. That's almost a mission for us on earth. لِتَعَارَفُوا means so that you. Okay, and ta'arafa is different than arafa. Arafa is to know. Ta'arafa is to interdigitate your lives to the point of really being familiar with who you are as human beings. Okay, not just what you do for a living or where you live or what have you, but as human beings, despite and because of all of the differences. All right? And then the last part of the sentence says, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most favored of you, or the most honorable of you in the eyes of God, is who? Is the most pious. And piety in Islam is not two-dimensional. You know, it's not la pietà. All right? Piety in Islam is a very active kind of concept. It is the awareness of God. It's like when Christians say Christ is at the center of my universe. This is piety in Islam. I'm constantly aware that he's there. And when I say he, it's just because the language is lacking. We cannot. He doesn't belong in any of those categories, so I've given up on that subject a long time ago. We all know that God is not neither a male or a female, and it's a silly subject to talk about. I mean, it had its time in the 80s, all right? But right now, I think we've gone beyond that. We all know nobody has testosterone or estrogen or whatever, so we're not creatures. We're not talking about God as a creature here. So that's the first thing is 5 minutes to 15 or 5 minutes to 25?
5 minutes to 20.
5 minutes to 20, okay, all right. So that's the very first thing that we have. The second thing that Islam insisted on, not only, and here he says you are all the same, the difference between you and my eyes is how aware you are of my presence and how you translate that into action in your life. The second thing is I'll give you the rules that will support that role. Okay, like what? And that's why Daddy gave me Simone de Beauvoir's, because in Islam, women's wealth and economic means are entirely separate by law from their husbands, from the males and their families. Okay, I was stunned when I think it was 1975, I had bought a piece of land. My husband wasn't really interested in it, and I said, okay, it was on the St. Croix River, and I said, let's, maybe in 3 years or so we can build a house. In 3 years, I had already found another house that we both liked, and I went to sell it. This is a true story, at the closing session, there's the attorneys and the realtors and whatever, and then somebody asked me, well, where is Mr. Reda? So I said, who's Mr. Reda? I said, your husband. He said, his name is not Mr. Reda. I said, what, aren't you married? Yes, we are, but Muslim women don't change their names. We keep our maiden names because we're not a part of the property that he inherits and calls for himself. It's just that. God in the Qur'an says, "Id'uhum li'aba'ihim." So I maintain my name. And then, what do you want him here for? He said, well, you can't sell this piece of land without his permission. I said, excuse me, I bought it without his permission. Why wouldn't I sell without his permission? Never heard of that. I never heard of it. I mean, I've had aunts and grandmothers and whatever selling and buying and what have you without any restrictions. If you are in a good marriage or a good family, etc., your husband is your best friend. So you consult with one another. But consulting is entirely different than taking permission. And so I called him at the office. He worked for 3M, and I said, honey, we need your holy signature on this piece of paper, or we aren't coming out of here. So these are two very important parts of what Islamic feminism is. Why a woman, a Muslim woman, not just needs to, but is actually entitled to those things. When we talk to the men about things that we're not very happy about, all we say is, I just want what God gave me. I don't want anything else. I'm perfectly happy with what the Qur'an gives me as the authoritative text for all the laws and all the kinds of rights that a human being has, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I'm going to have to stop here. I mean, I can go on for another hour, but... 3 more minutes? Okay, all right. Then the thing is, if Islam is that wonderful on the books, right, in the books, right? Why is it that we're having so much trouble? And I'm not talking about what's being said about us in the West. That's a different story altogether, and I think Nausheena is going to talk to us about it. I'm talking about what's happening to Muslim women in Muslim countries, in Muslim societies, because they definitely, their conditions does not really hold up to what I just told you. I mean, that's a wonderful whatever. And actually, with all due respect, it way exceeds what Christianity or Judaism gives women. And I don't have to tell you that. I mean, you know about it. And it starts with something very important, and again, nobody can take it away from me. It starts with Genesis. In Genesis, in the Bible, it says that they were doing great, and then Satan spoke to her, or the serpent, or whatever representation, and she spoke to the man and seduced him. I mean, to me, I said, what? When I heard that story, I said, then he's totally spineless, like he has. What? What is his willpower? You know, why doesn't he say no? I mean, forget it. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I think I was 13 or 14 at that time, and my father said, be careful, because that could hurt your Christian friends' feelings and whatever. You know, discussing religion is a very sensitive issue. But really, I mean, if it said the same thing in the Qur'an, I would say the same thing. It isn't just because it's Christian, not Qur'an. And there are things in the Qur'an that we quarrel with, believe me. But in the Qur'an, it's entirely different. It's entirely different. No one seduced anybody. There are, in Semitic languages, you probably familiar, those of you who know Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic also, there are 3 forms. There is singular, plural, and then there is dual, 2 people. So you say, for instance, hiya for she, hunna for they, women, huma for 2 of them, or a man and a woman, you know, huma, okay? The Qur'an says, وَأَزَلَّهُمَا الشَّيْطَانِ, which means Satan tripped the 2 of them. All right? And then the second part that relieves me as a woman is that God forgave them before they even came down here. So coming down here was a challenge, was not a punishment. So there is no such thing as the labor of pains. I mean, that's scary. You can imagine for a young woman, I mean, how scary. What? Having children, which is the thing that all of us, I mean, this is the completion of this part of my humanity, of my womanhood. I'm going to have children. And you're telling me that I'm going to suffer through this because of what happened, I don't know what, somewhere that I don't know? All right, is that enough? Yep, that's fine. Okay.
Kind of a delight to hang out with her, you might imagine. Our next speaker is Sheikha Tamara Gray. She's the founder of Rabada, an organization dedicated to promoting positive cultural change through individual empowerment, spiritual upbringing of women by women, and the revival of the female voice in scholarship. It sounds like United to me. Although she grew up in Minnesota, she lived in Syria for 20 years, studying the full curriculum of Islamic sacred texts and subjects. Her specialty is the life of Muhammad, which she studied in depth with the foremost Sirah, meaning Life of Muhammad scholar of our time. She's a doctoral student in Leadership and Policy Administration in the Leadership and Policy Administration program at the University of St. Thomas and holds a master's degree in Curriculum Theory and Instruction. She's also the founder of Daybreak Press Global Bookshop, which is on Washington Avenue near the U of M. Daybreak is a bookstore and a gathering place with a focus on faith, social justice, and women's empowerment, with books from around the world, as well as space for community gatherings, events, and regular programming. And she just invited participants from the United class that went to Israel-Palestine in January to come in and make a presentation. About 2 weeks ago we were there, so it's great. And some of their stuff is out back on the table. So, Sheikha.
Good evening, and thank you, Gail, for saying my name right. It's Tamara, rhymes with camera, so good job. Thank you to the United Theological Seminary for having all of us here tonight. It's really a wonderful opportunity to talk about my favorite thing to talk about. Well, I love to talk about Islam, and I love to talk about feminism, so tonight I get to talk about Islam, the feminist religion. So I hope you all brought your sleeping bags. Just kidding. Okay, so if we're talking about Islamic feminism, a lot of people, if I say to them Islamic feminism, they might ask me, isn't that an oxymoron? It's sort of like in St. Cloud, there's a street, if you drive down it, right in front of you, there's a sign that says, turn right only. And the next sign says, no way out. So is it an oxymoron? So I want you to think about that as I talk to you. I've been tasked tonight with the job of giving you a theological foundation of the idea of Islamic feminism. So at the end of my 18 and a half minutes, I'll ask you what you think about the oxymoron. Just help me put it up so I can more easily take care of it. So Adele, you know Adele? Okay, so hello. Hello is going to be our acronym for tonight. Okay, H-E-L-L-O. And we're going to find in this term, hello, we have Adele standing across the country in another town, wondering if her beloved remembers her. So I'm going to talk about the feminism of Islam as we stand on one side of the town and wonder if anyone remembers us in our community, and not only in our community, but outside of it. We have, as Dr. Fatma spoke about, we have a number of issues, and let's just put those to rest right now. The issues, the feminist issues that are out there in the Muslim community that we're dealing with are serious and they're real. And we have issues of FGM, we have the issue of can women drive or not in Saudi Arabia. We have issues of even voting. Saudi Arabian women just got the vote in 2015. And as my daughter says, Mama, it's a monarchy. So she's not even impressed by that. But so we have a number of issues for women. We have issues of pay as well in some places. We have issues of our mosques in the United States and whether or not our mosques are friendly to women or not. We have plenty of issues, and they're all serious and they're all real. As other women around the world have serious issues wherever we are. So this is not about pretending like we don't have issues. This is looking at the theological ideas behind the concept of Islamic feminism. So H is going to stand for hallowed tradition. Can you say it? Hallowed tradition. You guys must be at school here at United. That's really good. And E is for empowered systems. You don't have to say that one yet. Empowered systems, lived
literacies, legal discussions, and overcoming obstacles. So we're going to walk through the foundations, and we're going to end up thinking about what we can do about it and what we think about as Muslim women, Muslim leaders in our communities about what we want to do about it. And maybe I'll even tell you what you can do. We'll see. So first of all, as far as the hallowed tradition, Islam bases its thought on two basic texts. One is the Qur'an and the other is called the Sunnah. The Sunnah is the life and words and actions of our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. We also look to the lives of his companions and the people that lived in those early days. And we also look at something called qiyas, which is a legal term meaning analogy. And certainly I hope you all recognize that it's more complicated than that, but that's the simple base about where we get laws and ideas and principles. So the first place we look to find out if the concept of Islamic feminism could possibly be a reality is we look to the Qur'an. And we ask ourselves, is there any way in the Qur'an we could find a place, I gotta go a little closer here, that we could say that feminism as defined as recognizing women as people, as empowering women, as looking at equality between men and women, does it exist? So we have a verse, فَاسْتَجَابَ لَهُمْ رَبُّهُمْ أَنِّي لَا أُضِيعُ عَمَلَ عَامِلٍ مِّنكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنثَى بَعْضُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. And it goes on, but I won't. So in English, what that means is, and their Lord answered them, saying, I will not deny or lose or let not be counted the work of any one of you, be he male or female. Each of you are all one of another. So this is an important verse when we're talking about the ideas behind Islamic theology and feminism. There are a number of other verses that we could do tonight. One of them is إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ وَالْقَانِتِينَ وَالْقَانِتَاتِ, and it goes on as well, that says, indeed, the Muslim men and the Muslim women and the believing men and the believing women and the worshiping men and the worshiping women and the fasting men and the fasting women, it goes on for 10 qualities, are all forgiven and by God the Almighty. In other words, they're all together. And this verse was in response to a woman who lived at the time of the Prophet, who came to him and asked about women in the Qur'an. I want to hear about women in the Qur'an. And not long after that, this verse was revealed, saying, for Arabs who understand the language, this says that whenever there is the gender male in a word, you can find women in that gender as well. That's a language lesson that we won't walk into. So when we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ and how did he treat women and how did women live at his time, this is also an important question, another thing that we ask when we're thinking about, is there such a thing as Islamic feminism? During his life, we had women who worked. We had women who worked in the medical field. We had women who worked as developers of new institutions, women who taught and women who taught literacy, and women who spoke and had a voice. And I think really in feminism, having a voice is something that we constantly come back to and ask ourselves the question, do I have a voice? Are you listening? And we say this in politics, we say this in our homes, we say this in our communities. Are you listening? And during the time of Prophet Muhammad, especially in Medina, where we get most of our examples from, because that's a society that was a just society, as Dr. Fatma referred to it. We have numbers of women. We won't go into all of them. One of them is Sheikha. She was a doctor and a teacher of literacy. We have Rufayda, who built a hospital tent, but it was a hospital. And we have Waraqa, who was a spiritual leader. This is very important. And when we're thinking about mosques and such things, she was a spiritual leader who had memorized the Qur'an and led her family in prayer, and her home was so important as a place of spiritual grounding that the Prophet gave her a mu'adhin, which means gave her someone to call for prayer, equating it then to a mosque. We also have during this same time, women who fought in military battles and were praised to do so, and also were paid for their military service the same amount as men. No kidding. Yeah. So we have all of this during the lifetime of the Prophet and for a number of years after his life as well. So as we go forward into history, then we mix with other cultures and other ideas, and we sort of go backwards, unfortunately. So back to Islamic theology. What are our empowered systems? If I'm claiming we have an Islamic feminism, that means we better have a systemic reason for me to say that. And so our empowered systems include financial, which again, Dr. Fatma already spoke to, and in that a woman's money is her money, always has been her money, is only her money, and doesn't belong to anyone else. Some of the work I do with young Muslim women is tell them, get your money out of that joint bank account. Why is it there? And they always argue with me, that's all this romantic stuff. And I tell them, get your money out of the joint bank account. If he wants to put some of his money in your account, that's okay. And property as well, all of this. So there's a system to ensure that especially young married women, so we have something called a mahr, which is often translated to dowry, but dowry has a lot of negative connotations that really mean bride price. And a mahr is actually a wedding gift. And it's an amount of money given to the bride. And traditionally what women have done is they've taken this money as investment money, and they've bought buildings or taxis or such things so they could continue to have money throughout those early years of having children and all this. And also I'd like to remind you that the industrial age came with the ideas of factories and going to work in the morning, coming back at night. This has not been forever and probably won't be forever. So that's the mahr, or the wedding gift, is part of the system of financial empowerment. We have educational system where every human being is not only has a right to, but has a responsibility to get and seek, not just to receive, but to seek an education. And that would include both sacred and secular. And we have domestic systems, and our domestic systems are complicated, but I have to tell you one thing, which is one of our most important jurists, his name is Abu Hanifa, very important guy, has a whole legal school. It's like the founder of Harvard or something, okay, but a long time ago. And it's a school of thought, not a building. He has in his rulings, in his legal papers, a very clear description of who's responsible for domestic work, and it's not a wife. A wife is not responsible for domestic work. The family is responsible. And if the husband cannot afford to get help in the house for her, then he should pay her, because she's working and not able to do her own interests because she has to work in the house. And that's a legal thing that I think about 0.1% Muslims follow in the world, maybe. But in my house, we follow it. They have a right to political agency. Women have a right to political agency. And this goes back to our first vote that we ever did was for our fourth Khalifa. And that fourth Khalifa was Ali. Lots of complicated political stuff there we won't get into. But that was the first time there was ever an actual vote where they went around to the people asking them, who do you want as leader? Or do you agree? Do you vote for Ali? And the narrations tell us that they went to each person, including the young women who, in this sort of 18th century idea of coming out, the idea of women who would come out, even the young women who had not yet come out to society. That even the young women who were still not out and people didn't really know them yet, they even went into the homes and asked them, do you pledge or do you agree with this leader? So we have right to political agency. We have a lot of other stories surrounding that as well. And then as far as a social life, what I mean by social life here is the right to participate and be part of private life and public participation. So all women and men have a right to private life and public participation. And this is a very important part of our way of thinking, actually, and our way of building a society, as Dr. Fatima said, that the idea of just becoming kind of a monk and a spiritual person is not considered the best way to thank God for his blessings upon us. Okay. All right, so what are we going to do with that? So that's the system. We already know that the system isn't necessarily working everywhere in the world. You'll find in highly educated places where there's plenty of money, where colonialism hasn't affected it too badly, the system is working better than other places. 80% of Muslim countries were colonized. 80% of Muslim countries were colonized. It's a very important number as you start to try to think about and tease apart in your mind what's going on in the Muslim world and why are we at the state that we are in today. There are 3 types of literacy that I personally think are really important for Muslim women around the world, and actually probably for all women, but I work especially to help Muslim women with religious literacy, to be able to understand their religion so that they can speak about it to those around them and make changes. And then financial literacy, because unfortunately women today still around the world, although not Kuwaiti women, they have great financial literacy, but that's because they have money and they've had it for a while. But financial literacy is something very important for women around the world, and we've got to get better at financial literacy. It's not okay to say, I don't know. And general literacy as well is very important. If you can absolutely link places where literacy and poverty go together with oppression of women. It has really nothing to do with religion in those places. You can find it in places where there are Muslims or people of other faiths. And my time is up, so I'm just going to, I have, all right, woohoo, I'll go back one slide. We also have legal discussions, and I'd like to give you some good news about the Muslim community, and that is that we have an organization called the Islamic Society of North America, and this is a pretty important organization in the United States, and they have a Fiqh Council of North America, and that means that they have a council that sits together and talks about what's okay and what isn't okay in the mosques and things like that. And we have been pushing quite a bit for the past few years, pushing against the mosques that are not friendly to women, of which there are way too many. And last year, there was a declaration made by the Islamic Society of North America that calls upon all mosques in North America to be women-friendly, and that means having one space without a separating wall or curtain or anything else, which is one of the issues that we have. And it also means to make sure that there's a whole bunch of stuff that's messy that they're saying no longer should exist. And many scholars across the United States signed it, including myself, and then I thought, oh great, this is just one of those declarations that's gonna just be a declaration. How are you gonna change people? That's hard to change a place of worship where people have put money in it and they think this is the way it should be. But now there are task forces and committees, and they've got a lot of people working really hard to make a real difference. And I really think it's going to. I really believe it's going to make a difference. And I think the tide is changing in the mosques, and I think people are recognizing that that the colonial era that brought about a lot of the oppression is over. And even if we're dealing with dictatorships in our countries, in the United States, this is not a colonial country, and we can exercise our original feminism here in our mosques. And finally, so the obstacles that we're dealing with, as I said, post-colonial trauma is a serious one. We're dealing with post-colonial trauma amongst immigrant families and people around the world. We're dealing with cultural mindsets. The way people are raised affects them, as it should. And we need to help people that are raised in one way see the beautiful way of the Prophet and those around him and how they did things, and help them see that there is a better way, and a way that is open to women and men and our children and all people, and actually all people. We have an obstacle of poverty. I mentioned that. Of course, we have the obstacle of war and refugees. This is a serious problem. As Gail mentioned, I lived in Syria for 20 years. This is a very painful war to me, personally. We have issues of sectarianism, though they're far less than Westerners actually think. Sectarianism usually comes about by politicians trying to stir the pot and make people upset with one another. And we have ignorance. And our strategies are women's organizations, of which Nausheena will talk about one very important one here in Minnesota, and which I have one called Rabata. We have an online seminary that is raising a garden of female scholars, is what I like to say. And that's really important because we had female scholars, but post-colonial era meant that we had a dearth of female scholars. And I'm a female scholar, so I get to make some more. And we also are working on cooperation between organizations and groups. I think Minnesota does a pretty good job of trying to work together, especially the interfaith. I'm really impressed by the work that you guys do and the people that I've met. I've only been here since 2012, so it's all been very new to me. We are working on political pressure and economic protection, both. For me, I work a lot with economic protection amongst women in the United States because of issues of joint bank accounts and the kinds of issues here that really, and like you have to file taxes together, meaning you have to tell your husband how much money you have. For me, this is oppression. Why do I have to tell him? And like really, I don't file jointly with my husband. And every single time the government has an unpleasant reaction. And then, like, we're deterred from filing separately. And I think that's really, why does he have to know, why can't I have my own money? Why do I have to tell him the money that I have? So that's the way I look at things, at least. I want my own money. And finally, educational programs are very important, and especially in today's climate. We are hurting in this climate. It's real and it's serious, the hate that's out there, the permission to hate is real, and where I used to be helping women to be empowered, now I'm trying to help them to not be afraid. So that is a sad place in my own personal work. But hopefully this election season will be over soon, and the United States will do the right thing, and we will be on the other side of it in a better place, I hope. Thank you.
So I know that, I think Tamara started out saying something about an oxymoron, and then a lot of women in this room have joint bank accounts going, well, I never thought about it that way. The heck? Okay, our final speaker is Nausheena Hussain. And she's the founder of a new venture called RISE, and RISE stands for Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment. It's the mission of RISE to amplify the voice and power of Muslim women through leadership development, community engagement, and philanthropy. They train and equip women with the necessary skills to engage and participate in civil life, become part of the solution-creating, decision-making process, and improve society as a whole. We might need a RISE for non-Muslim women, too. Prior to founding RISE, Nausheena served as the deputy director of the Minnesota chapter of the Council on American-Islamic Relations. It's a civil rights organization. It does a lot of work, an advocacy organization. She's civically active, appointed to the commission as a commissioner on the Charter Commission for the City of Brooklyn Park. She crossed out a bunch of stuff I have to skip. She's co-founder and board member of the Brooklyn Park Islamic Center. And she founded the Muslim Youth Leadership Award and served on the board of directors. In 2012, she was named the 2012 Catalytic Leader by the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. Graduated from the University of Minnesota cum laude, and in 2003 with her MBA. Nausheena.
I have my own bank account. So it's 2014, and I'm sitting in a classroom in a business school learning about Islam. And there's probably over 200 students in this classroom. And as I gaze across my row, I see many, many women wearing the hijab in different colors, different shades, women who represent different races, different ethnicities, different cultures. And 75% of this class is filled with my sisters. And a moment of pride really humbles me because I don't think I see a lot of women in many spaces or places. Especially when I look across the world and I know that the basic right to education is always in a flux. And the sheikh that's teaching me, the male scholar, professor, he's teaching us about Islam, and he advises the entire class that sometimes the best way to learn is to follow and mentor, or find a mentor and follow and shadow them around. And he implores, find your local scholar and spend time with them, emulate them, watch him, learn from him. And through imitation, you will increase your understanding. And then it'll all kind of start to make sense. And so one hand kind of starts to rise, timidly, carefully, and softly asks, I'm a woman, and I can't really do that, so what should I do? And the sheikh answers, this concept of feminism is a Western concept. It has no place in Islam. And so my journey begins. So I learned that, contrary to popular belief, Islam actually rose at a time when women were being oppressed and they were being unvalued. And it actually raised their status about 1,400 years ago because, like the Sheikha, Tamara, and Dr. Fatma have mentioned, they were able to own their own property. They were allowed to have their own money. Now, they probably didn't have bank accounts, but they got to have their own money. They were physicians, they were teachers, they ran the treasury, advised the head of state. I mean, they were an integral part of a very prosperous society. I learned about Zubaydah, who pioneered a most ambitious project of digging wells and building service stations all along the pilgrimage route from Baghdad to Mecca. So when people would travel to perform the Hajj, they had places to stop and get water. And she constructed a very complex water system to make sure water from aquifers were coming into Mecca using underwater canals and aqueducts. A woman did that. And then there's Fatima al-Fahri. She founded the Qarawin Mosque. It's a school complex that became the oldest known university in the world. And it still exists, correct, Sheikha? And then I learned about Razia Sultan, and why I like her is because my mom's name is Razia, and Razia Sultan is from, she was a sultan of Delhi in India, and that's my heritage, back in the 13th century. And women usually have the A at the end of a title, so she should have been Razia Sultana, but she did not want that. She wanted to be known as the Sultan. She wanted people to know that she was the woman and the head of that empire. So imagine a time like that where women were leaders. Well, I started to imagine that, right? Because I didn't have to actually look very far, because I look at Pakistan that had Benazir Bhutto as their prime minister. The president of Indonesia was Megawati Sukarnoputri. Sheikh Hasina was a prime minister of Bangladesh. And I think the current president of Kosovo is a woman also. So how are all these Muslim majority countries letting women lead? Because today, when I look around, a sense of deja vu envelops me. In general, there's a lack of presence of women, regardless of what religion they are, in all backgrounds, in all sectors of life. It's not just Muslim women, right? It's Christian, it's Catholic, it's Jewish, it's Hindu. And it's not just brown and black women, it's even white women. It's basically all women that are kind of missing. And what I realized was, specifically, I saw a lack of women in leadership roles, in civic life, within their faith communities, and in philanthropy. And so just recently, last week, right, was International Women's Day, and I saw a hashtag, Planet 5050, that by 2030, we will be equal in population with men. But we aren't equal in anything else. For example, even though women account for 50% of the United States population, only 20% hold seats in the United States Senate. 12% are mayors of their cities, and 4% are CEOs of corporations. We've never even had a female president. That better change soon, folks. Women are paid 77 cents to the dollar compared to a man. And if women back in the Prophet's time were paid for their work equal to men, what's going on today? And a man gets promoted in the corporate world because of his potential, but a woman, she has to be accomplished and have a proven track record before she's even considered. Now, I'm not a fan of measuring my equality with men, but I do believe in equity. I want access to the same opportunities. And when I drill down on those numbers to look at Muslim women, I can't, because actually the data's missing. It doesn't exist. So it's anecdotal. And two, I don't see my Muslim sisters in very many places or spaces. So where are my Muslim sisters? You know, women aren't just a smaller percentage, they're actually completely absent. They're absent from the narrative. Muslim female leaders are almost forgotten, they're hidden, or they're lost in history. And so there's this gender divide and a gender bias, and hence the gender inequity. As Sheikha Tamara mentioned, in Minnesota alone, there are probably 40 to 50 different mosques and Islamic organizations. And I would say 90% of them are probably run by all male boards. And I should know because I'm actually in that little 10% as I started my venture at Brooklyn Park Islamic Center. And we made sure, we were very purposeful to making sure that women were included on our board. And many mosques don't accommodate for women who have small children. Sometimes things are spoken in a foreign language, so our millennials or our younger generation don't understand. And so basically you're sort of discouraged to come to the mosque and you don't feel a sense of belonging. And so people start to become more and more disengaged. Another sector of life I don't see many women is in civic engagement. With a bare minimum right to vote, which is not afforded in other countries, why is voter turnout so much lower for women than it is for their male counterparts? And for those who do vote, why does civic participation stop there? Women's place is in the house, is what I hear, right? Yes, the White House. Now, as both Dr. Fatma and Sheikha Tamara mentioned, I get a meher. It's all mine. I inherit, I have money, and I'm charitable. But I don't want to just relieve social problems. They're the same issues that are facing my community are facing everybody else's, right? Homelessness, college affordability, job security, racism, hate, bullying, gun safety. I want to find solutions to these issues, but I want to do it at the root cause, and I want it to be sustainable. So I want to be charitable, but also philanthropic. So what can we do? This lack of women present wasn't a religious mandate. They're rooted in cultural, post-colonization, patriarchal constructs, which need to be dismantled. So I wanted to create a sisterhood to empower women, especially Muslim women, so that collectively we could help them rise. Now, by no means did I think I was a leader. I mean, I always saw myself as a networker, an organizer, someone who can kind of help connect the dots. So I started to convene with women, have conversations, and what I started to hear was, I don't know enough women to even connect with. I don't know what Muslim women are doing. I want to do something, but I don't know how or what. And what could I possibly do with the little time that I have? So the deeper I went and the wider I went into reaching out to the community, I also uncovered, wow, there are actually some pretty phenomenal women in our community of all ages, of all ethnicities, and all walks of life. They're doing very, very important work and making change and creating good, but no one knows about it. So that's why I'm building this movement, because grassroots organizing, I think, is where it's all at. We want to create a platform, and we want to connect locally and help women network, mentor each other, understand the issues that we're facing. What changes do they want to see, and how can they be that change? We want to use that platform to give rise to women leaders, scholars, experts, create more opportunities for participation, help women get into more spaces and safe places, so to bring their scholarship, their ideas, and their causes, and amplify their voices. We want to train them, equip them, give women the leadership skills that they need to rise through workshops and trainings. You know, no one really understands what civic engagement is, so let's help break that down, dissect it, redefine it. We recently had a training to caucus, and so many women went and casted their ballot. They even dragged their husbands along with them. They took their daughters, and they stepped up to be chairs of their caucus or their precinct, and then they're even going to be delegates for the next Senate District Caucus. I mean, this was huge for our community. So we created this opportunity, we set them up for success, and we let them soar. And in Islam, one of the basic pillars of belief is giving charity. We have money, we're financial influencers. Muslim women are the heads of their households. Some earn the money, and many safeguard that money. They make the financial decisions in the household. They make smart decisions. But what I heard from many of them was that they're concerned of the sustainability of the nonprofits they donate to. They want to find ways that can create more solutions to solving for their causes so that they would have cash flow for years to come. And I thought, well, let's move from behind-the-scene donors and become more philanthropic frontrunners. And so a concept was born, which I call Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, which is RISE. And the mission of RISE is to amplify the voice and power of Muslim women through leadership, development, community engagement, and philanthropy. RISE will be that platform that connects the sisterhood, develops leadership skills and opportunities, brings purpose to civic life, and connects it to creating solutions as philanthropists. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she's part of the reason why I do the work I do, because I want her to be strong and smart and be a change maker and to make a world a better place. I want her to excel, and I know she often hears people say, you've got big shoes to fill, you have to follow in your mom's footsteps, but I actually don't want her to follow in my path. I want her to forge her own path beside me and go further than I could have ever imagined. And yes, she wants to be the President of the United States. I have the power to make decisions that create sustainable systemic change and impact thousands of people in my community and inspire other women to lead. And I know if I, as a Muslim woman of color, can get there, I can take others along with me. And through this work, we're defying stereotypes, we're breaking barriers, and we're probably upsetting some people. But it's worth it, because let's face it, well-behaved women seldom make history. So now is the time for women to lead and be the change they want to see. So I hope that you all will join me in helping women rise. I did take that scholar's advice and found plenty of scholars to follow on my journey. I found one very special one. Thank you.
All right, is this on, Colin? There we go. We're going to do questions now. I want a show of hands how many people still think feminism, Islam, oxymoron. No more? Good. We did it. So,
The audience.
or they're too afraid of all the women in here.
I was going to say.
Some of you have been writing down questions, perhaps. If you could, pass them down and people will bring them up. and we can do some of that. I have a couple to start us off with. We're doing this panel on Islam and feminism. We have 3 women up here. What about the men? Are there men feminists? Do you find support in your community? Do you find pushback in your community? I'm sure the answer to both of those is yes. If you could give us some examples. Muhammad.
Prophet Muhammad, anytime you have a situation where there is conflict as far as the understanding of what needs to be done under the situation, et cetera, I'd say, fine. Who's your role model? You know, a man. For instance, I remember a Yemeni woman who came in and she'd already been married and was pregnant and came in to join her husband and came in and found him cohabiting with a local woman and using drugs and things like that. And so a woman in Islamic law has the right to refuse to conduct the marriage relationships, or participate in the marriage relationships if he's breaking the law. If you're drinking, if you're living with someone else in sin, et cetera, you cannot expect me to give you my wifely duties, et cetera. And of course, he was very upset, and I was called by one of the sheikhs to come and help out. And so, very, very simply, I asked him, who's your role model? He said, Prophet Muhammad. I said, I rest my case.
When I started this in 2012, I asked myself, I said, well, self, you're gonna face a lot, and you can decide not to do this. Like right now, you can decide you're in Minnesota, you haven't been here for 20 years, you can devote this time to your family and just go to school and knit or something. And you can just decide not to be involved. I don't know why is that funny that I was going to knit? I don't know.
Because they're all knitting.
I know. I actually learned how to knit that year. Not very good at it, but anyway, crochet. So at that point, I made the decision that I'm going to go do it, and I faced quite a bit of pushback. But there are Muslim male allies in our community, quite a few. Mm-hmm. And every time a new gentleman stands up as a Muslim male ally to the cause of female empowerment within the community, it's very encouraging, very, very encouraging. So, you want something to say about that?
Can I point out to a couple of our male allies here? Zafar, can you stand up, please? Mr. Siddiqui, can you stand up, please?
She's pointing you out as an ally.
You're one of our allies, so stand up, please. Zafar Siddiqui.
I was posting about you all on Facebook.
Okay. And
He's an ally.
Zafar, you're the founder of IRG, correct? Islamic Resource Group, and he's a great feminist. All right, Islamic feminist. We have also Brother Awais Bayunas.
He's behind
Where
you.
is he? Okay, here we are. Okay, can you stand up, please? Thank you. Thank you, Brother Awais. Brother Awais has been actually the founder of the group that Gail was a part of. How long have you been in existence now? It's the longest in the United States.
The dialogue that we have, that's what you say,
Yes.
it's about 27 years
Okay.
that we are meeting every month
Right.
with Mr. Council churches, many of the churches.
Yeah. And for this psychiatrist,
Interesting.
he's my counselor. When I'm stuck with the males in the community, that's where I go talk. So.
Nausheena, do you get pushback?
Yep. You know, when I first started thinking about RISE, it was all about empowerment. I didn't use the terminology feminist or feminism, and not because I thought it was negative or anything like that. That wasn't what we were using for branding. But we started to get advice from people, especially women, which was surprising. That don't use feminism. It's all what I think about feminism is angry women burning bras, and I was like, I don't get it. I was like, there's a spectrum, right? But a couple members of our board said, if anybody comes after us talking about feminism and how it's bad, we will just ninja them together. So we're in it together.
Okay, there's a question I knew, this is on several of these cards, and I knew it would come up, because it always does. There's a preoccupation with the thing that you guys wear on your head. How can you be a feminist and wear a hijab?
Who wants to start?
In fact, when I was telling people about, telling non-Muslims about this, and I had 3 Muslim feminists were going to speak, and they kept saying, and they don't wear hijab, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, first of all, what is hijab, and why do we wear hijab? The point is, it's a choice that you make. That's number one. Number two, it comes from a very central teaching in Islam, which applies both to men and women. I don't know how many of you know that Muslim men have a dress code. I don't know how many of you know that. Well, they don't like to talk about it, but we'll tell you. All right? The idea is modesty, and without going really into all of the legalities and this verse versus that verse, etc., there is no contradiction between, I think I mentioned to you a little while ago, I love nuns, and I'm very brokenhearted that they're taking off their habit. It's beautiful, and it gives a message of humility and focus on service, etc., etc. I wasn't always dressed like that, even though I come from an observant family, and my grandfather happens to be a fairly famous scholar in Islam. But we were not forced to be covered. The teaching was given to us. And the same dad I spoke about before said, it's between you and your creator. You'll go talk to him in the hereafter, and you have your own chat, and you find out what's right and what's wrong. You find out what's right and what's wrong. All right? I'm not going to police you for the rest of your life, and I'm not, because that's another beautiful thing. It's really liberating in Islam, that no one carries anybody's either the wages for his or her mistakes or the rewards. Each individual is responsible for his or her actions, period. And so when you tell me that I'm responsible for my actions, doesn't that automatically mean that I have the authority to decide? What is it to you? I'll go talk to my God. So, but what I'm trying to say is, each one of us, I'm sure if you ask the 3 of us, and I have not had this conversation with Tamara and Nausheena before, but we probably have 3 different reasons for why we are wearing the hijab. And each one of them is very personal for the individual. That's number one. Number 2, I don't know that taking off your clothes is a sign of freedom. Freedom what? Why isn't everybody living on a nudist beach then? That's the epitome of freedom. Ridiculous. The idea, the connection between the two, I could never figure it out. The only thing I could figure out is that we are oppressed into doing that. The males in our families are telling us this, etc., etc. And I've already told you that we all have different bank accounts and what have you. So what's that's much more important than how you dress, etc., etc. So that's what I'm saying. There is no connection between the two. Absolutely no connection. You want to say something?
I would agree with that. As far as I'm concerned, again, I guess I'll take on the theological role. The theological explanation of hijab, which is the modern term for the scarf, I guess, is أن يعرفن ولا يؤذين. And so this is a verse of the Qur'an which means to be known that we dress like this, to be known and not to be exploited. And so the idea of being known is about declaring your faith, and it's a commitment to God and to be a faithful person. So on one hand, it's about spirituality, and it's about making that very public statement every single day that I am a believer in God. And on the other hand, it's about removing, well, this is my own, I'm saying this now, my own sort of thoughts, about removing the possibility of sexual exploitation. Now, certainly it can still happen. I'm not, obviously. But removing the competition to dress the less and dress the best, and instead to move aside from being a fashionista, or even just move aside from, as you said, Dr. Fatima, from how much can I take off and still be taken seriously, to just, look, this is what you get. I know it's boring, but that's it.
Nausheena, you're not boring.
So I started wearing hijab when I was attending college at a Catholic university. And by then I was married, and everybody thought I was doing it because my husband made me, and that's not true at all. Ask him how much he can make me do things.
Right.
But I do want to say that I feel like I make a political statement when I wear my hijab, because when you see me, you should see your First Amendment right in action, because this is the freedom of speech and it's the freedom of religion, and it should remind you that as an American, as a United States citizen, I can practice whatever religion I want, however I want, and that's what I'm doing.
I want to, I'm a Facebook friend of Dr. Reda, which is a blast, if you want to do that. She posted a cartoon, I don't know if you remember this, it was a woman dressed in just a bikini and sunglasses. And next to her was a woman dressed in a niqab, which is the black veil that covers everything but the eyes. And the woman in the bikini was saying, look at her, totally covered except for her eyes. How hard it must be to be oppressed by men. And then the woman in the niqab was saying, look at her, completely uncovered except for her eyes. How hard it must be to be oppressed by men. Point of view.
Right.
Yeah. Can I
say something very quickly? I think it's the statement in the Qur'an about حتى يعرفنا فلا يؤذين is very, very important. It says, dress modestly, I mean the ayat before, dress modestly so that when you go out, you will be known as Muslim observant women, and so you would not be molested by others. We're not talking about rape and did she bring it on herself or whatever. We're talking about a society where decent women dressed in certain ways and indecent women dressed another way. That happened. Actually, I raised 3 children. I raised 3 girls. And one of them one time brought a skirt about this big and bought it for $118 or some such ridiculous thing. And I said, wow, that's really beautiful. Try it on. And she tried it on. I said, goodness, it looks gorgeous in you. And how much did you pay for it? And she said, $118. I said, wouldn't it be a little too much for something you're just going to wear at home? So her two sisters started joking. They knew what Mom was up to. And she said, why? I said, okay, let's add fishnet stockings, 6-inch stilettos, I don't know what for whatever, and I'll take you and drop you on Hennepin Avenue. And her 2 sisters said, oh, Mom, the $100 will start flying. I said, exactly my point. That's it. The idea is not oppression or whatever. The idea is I'm a physician. I can go make rounds in shorts if I wanted to. But will anybody really treat me with the respect and whatever? We live in a community. We don't live in an island in the South Pacific all by ourselves. We can run nude at that time. It's very important to take those kinds of things into consideration. And if you go to any one of the malls and you see that the boys are sitting below the what are they looking at? Well, I'm not for public consumption, thank you.
All right, so I think this one is for Sheikha Tamara. About the verses in the Qur'an that are used to promote the patriarchy and are used by anti-women Muslim leaders.
So what's the question about?
Well, are there verses I certainly know that there are verses in the Bible that get, raised up all the time to keep women, be silent in church, for instance. Mm-hmm. Are there verses in the Quran that are used by men or anti-feminist people to be that way?
Yes.
Sure. Can you cite some?
I think that whenever you have sacred text, one of the dangers is using sacred text to pursue or to further your own personal agenda. And certainly the personal agenda of a more patriarchal or misogynist view has been pursued based on some verses in the Qur'an. I mean, I didn't know, it would take me quite a while to break down those verses and talk about the language and how it's misunderstood. But my really simple answer will be that the only way that can be done is by cherry picking a verse. So they have to pull the verse out and ignore what came before and ignore what comes after and ignore the grammatical realities of the Arabic language. If they do that, that's okay. I mean, it'll look like it makes sense. And very often it happens in English, because then there's not English for a Muslim. A verse in English is no longer the Qur'an. It's just someone's interpretation of it. That very often happens in English. It does happen in Arab countries as well. But it's really difficult for that to happen when you have a community of educated women. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm working for that.
Here's a couple questions here about, you go out like a coffee shop, a lot of Muslim men know women. As Nausheena said, the boards of all the mosques, well, not all the mosques, but many, all men. Mm-hmm. I work interfaith with Muslims, lots of men. So Nausheena, where are the women? Why aren't they out there?
I don't know, I'm looking for them too. So as I talk to more and more women, what I'm understanding is that like one woman had said, my number one priority are my family, are my kids. And Sheikha Tamara did a great job of helping her understand, well, actually, your number one priority should be like to God, to serve God. And if that becomes your number one priority, then everything else will kind of fall in place. And so there's this, I guess, post-colonization trauma that we're going through is that for women, raising their children is number one priority, and they're the only ones who are supposed to be responsible for that. So it's hard for some women to get away from that, and then there aren't places that accommodate for the mom, for the working mother.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something?
Sure. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that one of the reasons I'm working so hard for mosques to be more accommodating is because I believe in the importance of the institution. And as long as our institutions are not friendly to women, then women are not coming to the mosque, they're not getting to know one another there. And it's not a friendly place for them, so they kind of stay at home, they become isolated. They don't get to know one another, they don't find committees, they don't find, like the church lady to greet them and whatever. And so that's, I believe, part of the problem, and that's one thing we're really working on.
The other thing is we have quite a large percentage of well-educated women in our community with university degrees and master's degrees and PhDs and MDs. We have a whole collection of MDs, Muslim women here in Minnesota. And what you find is the day is 24 hours. And being an immigrant community, that may change now with the next generation. You are aware that you are up against odds that a Muslim, if you were living in a Muslim society, would have more support around them than you would here. Okay, and then the second thing is what Tamara just mentioned is, and Sheena, is that there is no support at the workplace. For instance, that happened to me personally. I was recruited to work at the University of Minnesota after my residency, and at the interview, I said, can I bring, because I postponed having children until then, but now I want to have children. We are Arabs, we breastfeed, etc., etc. I want to, and they looked at me like I just descended from Mars. That was 1979. I mean, ancient history, there is no way. And I said, then I'm not coming. And went and opened my own private practice, which then is more of a load for you, and so on. So there are the practicalities of life. It's not always that they are oppressed by women, by men, or kept against their will and whatever. As a matter of fact, a lot of them are not. But it's just that there are certain things that they are worried about, and they want to know that they are doing a good job as far as the children are concerned.
Also, I think that it depends where you are. If you go to the Somali Mall, the Carmel Mall down on Pillsbury and Lake, that's where it is. When you walk through, all the people in the shop, all the people running the shops are women. Most of the shops are owned by women, so it depends, where they are and where they're out. I have one last question. I will start with our scholar. A lot of questions here about women imams, women leading prayer. Why are all the imams men?
Okay, so the imam position, let's make sure everyone knows what we're talking about. The position of imam is, the meaning of that is the person who's going to lead the prayer. It's not the same as priest or pastor, minister, or rabbi, just so we're clear about that. Because when you say priest, pastor, rabbi, you're talking about someone who can make legal decisions for you or give you religious talk based on a legitimate scholarly background. An imam is a person who leads a prayer. And the majority opinion in the Islamic, the majority opinion is that in a group prayer where there are both men and women, that it should only be a man that prays. There's a minority opinion that says that it doesn't matter, but the person who prays has to be the most knowledgeable and has the most Qur'an and memorize the most Qur'an and be the eldest and a number of other conditions. In the mosques today, I just want to be clear, for me, I know it's a big issue for people of other faiths because the imam represents to so many people that minister, that priest, that leader of the church. For me, this is kind of a non-issue because for me, the person leading the prayer is just the person leading the prayer. And I want a voice, and I want power in the mosque, and I want power in the community, and I want to be able to say what's going to be done and how we're going to bring our community together and how we're going to live our Islamic life and things like that. For me, that's more important. And so that's where I focus. We have had some scholars and some women in the United States who have focused on this issue and trying to bring forth that minority opinion. To be perfectly frank with you, I don't think our community is ready to even talk about that minority opinion. And for me personally, I choose my battles. And I'm interested in building pastors and priests, which, by that I mean scholars and those who have real legitimacy in their grounding in traditional knowledge and their grounding in what is possible and just how to raise a community and keep us together and keep us praying.
The next step would be, once we have those scholars, women scholars, will they be allowed to give legal opinion?
You keep pushing. All right, thank you everyone for coming. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions there.